thanks for joining us for the Robinson Lloyd Resiliency Group. Today we're discussing what causes academic underperformance, and we have with us my uncle, Opio Puckerin, who's been in education as well as has been a social worker, to give us some ideas on tips on how you can help your kids succeed even with these times with online learning and the pandemic. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Opio a few questions. And the first question that sort of came to me was that we have this mandate right now in the US. We have a mandate for, no Fs, a no Fs mandate. And I was just wondering, is it that we should have a no Fs mandate, or should we rethink the education sort of system and the way that we mark kids on an A to F scale? Should that be something that needs to be reevaluated? What are your thoughts?
Well, actually, after reading the pedagogy of education by Paulo Freire, I would say then that we need to review our approach to education and move away from the factory cookie cut type approach and try to deal with children as individuals. Being a teacher takes a lot of energy because you're talking about every child counts. Therefore, you need something like an IEP, individual education plan, to treat with each and every learner. Some students learn like sequentially, some learn body kinesthetically, some learn in groups, some learn individually. So identifying the learning style of the students and dealing with them as individual is a challenge. Thus, the work of a teacher is really, really paramount in terms of the amount of work a teacher has to do in order to be successful. So yeah, I would recommend reviewing the traditional educational curriculum and coming up with something more innovative. Idea like making education fun, for example, rather than the sort of authoritarian approach to education that we have now.
Agreed. Agreed. And I was, just sort of skimming through John Holt's work, something that my mom gave me to read, this book, How Children Fail. And some of the ideas that he had, it was really interesting for me that he quoted three things. He said that a bright child, it was interesting that he said a bright child, and it sounded very similar to what a resilient child is. And so he said a bright child could sort of deal with uncertainties of life and failure. And a bright child is resourceful, and a bright child can still, have gratitude for life, just like a desire to be curious about life. Which really connects to what you were saying about making learning fun and having a little bit more innovation. So in terms of sort of getting this spark lit in children and building their resilience and their sense of self, how do we do that in a pandemic, which has sort of been going on for a long time? How do we sort of keep kids centered and motivated to learn?
Well, the first thing as a teacher, you have to deal with expectation. Your expectation, whether it's subliminally or directly placed towards a child, would also spark that sort of what you might call light in the child. More than that too, I think we go back to, in terms of parenting, preventive type approach to parenting where we teach social skills, because you have to create these children who are autopiloted. I mean, children who recognize that they have a part to play. And again, it's parenting styles. In parenting styles, we talk about the authoritarian parent, and we talk about the indulgent parent, and we talk about the consultative type parent or the authoritative type parent. And, when we talk about the consultative type parent, is that we give a child a word. We give a child a being. And once you give a child a being, in terms of you are consulting with this child and not dictating this child, you already starting the movements towards what you might call autopiloting, where this child is ready to take charge of his or her own, because this child is a critical thinker as compared to probably authoritarian child or indulgent parenting style child. The consultative or the authoritative parenting style seem to ignite that positive energy for critical thinking skills to be sort of lit, sparking that what you might call explosion in terms of that child being self-directed, as well as preventive teaching a child to be a socially adept at social skills, recognizing, what is important in order to be a part of a greater team, and recognizing then that they can, at least through that sort of preventive teaching, redirect themselves again. So I recommend, say, parenting styles approach, and also within parenting, teaching children to think for themselves, and teaching children, preventive teaching, preparing them for situations that they might encounter and difficult situations they might have to deal with. And in that way, developing that resiliency that you spoke about, the resiliency in the child to autopilot him or herself rather than depending on the parent or supervisor, especially talking about the pandemic. How do we get children to push and to motivate them in order that I am responsible? My mother or my father is at work, but I have a responsibility. And all that come up in terms of having a relationship with your children.
Yes. Wow, that was really powerful, and it made me wonder, should we ask the kids? Should we ask them their perspective in terms of this online school? What do you need? What is going to work for you? How can you get this to work for you?
And again, Ms. Robinson, the whole approach again is the authoritative / consultative type parenting. In consultative type parenting, you ask questions. How are you doing? How is it working for you? How can it work best? How do you think? How do you feel being all alone in terms of directing yourself? And if you cannot handle it, what you think the outcomes would be? Questions that will have that child thinking critically,
Yes,
in terms of where I am and how I can get forward. So
exactly.
again, I think parenting have a lot to do with it. In the parenting approach I take, I am exposed to common sense parenting. We talk about time, talk to your children, instruct your children, monitor your children, and encourage your children. And when we talk about encouragement, I talk about effective praise. Once you effectively praise your child, that will motivate your child to go forward. And again, thinking about how you treat with your children, one negative, you should have 4 positive. Every one negative word you say to your child, you should complement that by 4 positive words.
Powerful.
And that way you would increase that positive thinking. As a matter of fact, your words should be positive in terms of relating and interacting with your children. Not words like don't and can't, but could and would.
Yes, yes, just so you're touching not just on the teachers and the hard work that they put in their classes, you're also touching on the parenting styles, how we communicate to children, and you're also touching on involving children in the daily, decision making that their parents do, just involving them,
It's definitely important for the child to be involved because it's their life. And they are the ones to carry that through, especially these challenging times when parents are not always present to supervise, when the teachers are not always present to supervise. We have to develop that resiliency within them or within our children to move forward and to see a better way, a more constructive way of approaching their education.
Exactly. Exactly. And, one of the questions that holds reference was, where are you going? And do you have the tools to get you there? Where are you going? And do you have what you need to get you there? And I thought that was a really, interesting question that we pose even to kids in the Resilient Stars program, right? what do you think you need? So for example, just one example I'll share, and this actually speaks to other children, where I ask a child, I say, you know what, I noticed that you had A's and B's before the pandemic, and now you have C's and D's. What happened? Right? Can we think of some of the things that maybe you did before the pandemic and some of the things that you're doing now that instead of taking you closer to what the A's and B's, it's taking you away from it? And they would actually sit and think, you know what? I used to do revision every day when I came home from school. I don't do it anymore. Instead, I'm gaming. So we use that, as you discussed, the critical thinking piece to get them to see how to correct, as you said, to autopilot, to get them back in the driver's seat of their own lives.
I think too, we need to have them be honest with themselves in terms of the idea of doing their best. And once they tell you that they're doing their best, whether their best is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it's all good because we know it's their best. And from their best, it's an incremental process because from 1, 2, we go to 1, we step to 2, from 2, we step to 3. So the idea of identifying, are you doing your best? No, I am not. If you are not, then what can we do to have you do your best? Because whatever your best is good. Your best is always good because then it's honestly a reflection of where you are and mapping your path where you will be going. So those kind of questions are very, very relevant. And this is the way we have to approach our children, by stark honesty and direct questioning.
I love it. Thank you so much, Uncle Opio. I'm going to ask you to come back because I know that we just started the beginning of conversations that could really empower parents, and really, really thank you for your time. Really awesome. All right. So that's it for our session today on, what we could do to help our children increase their academic performance, particularly in these times of pandemic.